Hello everyone, my name is Greg and I dev stuff. Welcome to Let's Research Lockpicking minigame. So in this episode we will implement lockpicking minigame from games like Fallout 3 and I think 4 and Skyrim. In those games when you're trying to pick the lock you can rotate your pick to pick an angle and then you try this angle. If you are in the approximate area of the correct angle which game picks for you, if you rotate the cylinder, it will rotate further. The closer you are to the center of the desired picked angle, the further the cylinder will rotate. And if you are guessing correct angle, it will open the lock by completing the rotation. The skill of the character increases the area which is acceptable for rotation, so it makes the guessing game more lenient. So I asked G. Spencer on my Discord server to make me some very basic models for this minigame. He provided us with those models, which is a big thank you. You will find those models in the description. Okay, let's drop them on the scene. And before we code anything, we want to animate our lock and pick. Unpack the prefab. We are not going to use this pick, so let's delete it. It is obvious that in your case, in your game, you should use much more, professionally made or better kind of art. This code actually will work fine with even 2D art, you will just need to animate it with 2D assets. Now let's place the camera in front of the lock. Good. Now we want to animate everything what we have inside the Unity. Let's start by selecting the lock parent object and creating animator. Then create and add lock animator controller to our animator. Open animator window. Then open animation window. Inside click on create clip. I created a new folder and now let's rename our clip to lock locked. Now inside the animation window click on the red record button and let's move our cylinder a little. Then I place it into default position. This will create a keyframe. Okay, now let's create one more animation, but let's call it lock opened. Do the same process to create open lock state. Good. Create new blend tree in the animator. To use those two animations we will use blend tree. So we will blend between those two states. Open blend tree. Add two new motion fields. And look, Unity automatically created a variable for us to use for this motion field. You see, when this value is 0, the cylinder is in default locked state. If it is 1, it is opened, and everything in between represents the travel distance between those two states. Good. We have our slog. Now we want to deal with our peak. Let's place it inside our ski hole, and then scale it up. And change its color so it will be easier to distinguish from the background. Good. Now we want to rotate our peak. We will do it the same way we rotated the cylinder, but with the new blend parameter called peak position. First, let's put the peak into the container, so we will have an easier time rotating it around the pivot. Then create two animation states, one for left position, one for right position. Inside the animator, create new layer for the peak. Inside this layer, create new blend tree, and using new parameter called peak position, set up the peak rotation. Make sure you assign one F weight on the pick layer. Let's launch and test this. As you can see, if I change pick position parameter, it rotates the pick inside the keyhole. But there is a problem. If we are rotating the cylinder, the pick doesn't follow it. To fix this, we will once again use blend trees. Create two animation states for our pick position in the cylinder. One for closed position and one for open position. Then create a new layer for pick position and do similar blend tree for pick position animation. Let's test this. Good. Of course, in more professional game you would want to use much better animations, and maybe add a screwdriver to animate applying the force to the lock, but you can do this yourself based on what we already did there. Good, now we have everything. We have rotation of the cylinder, we have rotation of our pick, so we can proceed to coding. Select the lock and create and add a new script called Lockpicking minigame. Open newly created script. So in this script we will be describing the process of lockpicking. You know, coding the actual minigame. First let's declare two variables and encapsulate them into property. Pick position and cylinder position. Inside the set, we want to make it so our value cannot go outside the 0 to 1 range. Good. Now inside the update, create and call pick method. Inside this method, we will rotate our pick. To do this, add horizontal axis to pick position and multiply this by time delta time and pick speed. Create serialized field called pick speed, so you can change the speed of pick rotation. Good. Now create new method called update animator. Inside, set float, pick position to the animator. For some reason my Unity didn't attach script to the lock. Now let's test this. If I press A or D, my pick rotates. Good. Now we need to implement cylinder rotation. Create and call new method called cylinder in the update. Inside this cylinder method, we want to add absolute value of vertical axis multiplied by time delta time and cylinder rotation speed. Absolute makes it so it doesn't matter if you press V or S to rotate the cylinder, because it turns the axis value into absolute value. That means if it, for example, -1, because you pull it down, it will become 1. Add the animator set float for lock open. Let's test this. Good. But there is no retention on this cylinder, so even if I lift my finger from the keyboard, our cylinder doesn't return to default position over time. So let's add retention speed serialized field and subtract it from the cylinder position inside the cylinder. Make sure that it is always lower than your cylinder rotation speed. You can play with cylinder rotation speed and cylinder retention speed to achieve the feeling you want for the game. Good, now let's register when we win lockpicking minigame. To do this, our cylinder position should reach certain level, and we should stop execution of the game after that. Create bool variable called post. In the update, if the game is paused, return out of updates, so nothing will be executed. Then inside the cylinder, check is the cylinder position more than number close to 1. In that case, call and create win function. Inside newly created win function, put the game on pause and put the debug message you opened the lock or something else. Later on in the development you want to place some kind of callback to your overworld that yes, you open the door, now proceed to open the actual door in the world and etc etc. So you want to synchronize your minigame and the actual world itself. And you will be doing this inside this method. Let's test this. Good. Okay, now we want to make it so not all positions of the lockpick will unlock the lock. Let's create new method called init. Inside, let's nullify the cylinder position and pick position. Then create new variable called target position, and inside init fill it with random value. Value returns a float value between 0 and 1. Then call init from the start. Good, now we want to calculate max distance of rotation. Let's make a property which will return the maximum distance of rotation based on the distance between target position and peak position. Then we want to add leniency to this max rotation distance. The higher the leniency value, the bigger the gate to unlock the lock. Put max rotation distance into cylinder position clamp limit. Oh, I forgot to make it so when we calculate max rotation we put 1 minus everything we calculated. My bad. Good, as you can see we have a correct position which we need to find to pick the lock. Okay, let's add the limitation that while you're rotating the cylinder you can't rotate the pick. Good. Now let's animate our pick so we will know that we're hitting the rotation limit. Create new layer for the pick. This layer will be additive instead of override. Assign some weight to the layer and add two states, idle and shaking. Link them together and create new bool parameter called shake. And in case it is true, switch between states. Create new animation for pick where we will shake our pick a little. And use it on our animator. Let's test this. If I turn on the shake, it should shake the pick. Good. Create bool variable called shaking. and in the update calculate if the max rotation minus cylinder position is less than, let's say, 0.03. In that case, pick will shake. Let's test this. Good. Now let's add the ability to break the peak. Put the shaking calculation into the separate method. And inside this method, if we are shaking, increase the new float variable called tension. If tension reaches 1, which will represent 1 second of tension, it will break. Here inside this method you want to tell to your inventory that you broke the peak, but we will just put the game on pause for now, because it's just a tutorial. Let's test this. Good. One last thing, let's create reset method, which will reset the state of the minigame. As you can see, when I break the pin, now the game resets itself into the default position, but the target position will still be the same. If you want to get the new target position, you have to call init. Good, this is it for this episode. If you have any questions or any ideas about the code, please leave your comment below. If you're interested in seeing more content from me, please subscribe. If you want to support further, you can find my Patreon in the description. Special thank you to Stefan and Cameron Smith for their generous support. With best regards, see you in the next episode.